Flight crew calls security on black woman. Then she pulls out her USS Senator ID. Picture yourself in the bustling expanse of Washington Dulles International Airport, where travelers scurry in every direction, bags rolling along the polished floors, overhead announcements echoing through the concourses. In the midst of this orchestrated chaos, one woman sits quietly at gate D14. She could be any professional, unassuming yet poised, reading from a tablet, periodically glancing at her phone. Everything about her seems normal. Only a chosen few know her real identity. Kiana Roberts, a sitting United States Senator en route to Chicago for a crucial community event. Little does she know that, within the next couple of hours, an explosive confrontation at 35,000 feet will test her dignity and spark a public outcry that no one can ignore. Kiana Roberts woke to the shrill alarm of her phone in a modest hotel room not far from Capitol Hill. 5 hours earlier, she had fallen asleep while revising notes for a critical meeting with an advocacy group focused on mental health legislation. She was used to long days and short nights, one of the necessary evils of political life. Today's schedule included a quick return flight from D.C. to Chicago. Back in her home state, a community event awaited her in Bronzeville, a historic neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. The event aimed to highlight new job training initiatives for underrepresented youth. Kiana's presence was essential. She had spearheaded a federal grant for these very programs, and local organizers hoped her appearance would rally further support. After throwing on a tailored but comfortable black blazer, a crisp blouse, and slacks, she checked out of the hotel and hopped into a car bound for Washington Dulles International Airport. She felt a sense of relief leaving the high-stakes environment of the capital briefly, at least. Although she was still heading to another responsibility, traveling had always offered a sliver of personal space. The irony was, being in the public eye meant even her flights felt like an extension of her job. Constituents sometimes recognized her. Staffers sometimes met her at gates with urgent updates, and reporters occasionally tried to corner her in the terminal. By the time she arrived at Dulles, the sky was just turning from dark blue to the softer grey of dawn. She could feel the day's demands pressing on her, phone calls to return, legislative proposals to review, and that event in Chicago that promised a large turnout. Despite the million tasks swirling in her mind, she took a moment to breathe deeply in front of the automatic doors. One foot in front of the other, she thought. Just get on the plane, Kiana, and do the job you're meant to do. She made her way inside, where the terminal buzzed with early travelers. Families with young children stumbled through the concourse, bleary-eyed and juggling strollers. Business executives marched briskly, phones glued to their ears. Tourists snapped photos, excited about new destinations. Kiana blended in, or so she believed, as she walked to the check-in kiosk. She traveled light, carrying only a small suitcase and a satchel stuffed with briefing documents. Though she was entitled to certain perks as a U.S. Senator, she always insisted on commercial flights for official business, maintaining her down-to-earth image and reminding herself of why she joined politics in the first place, to serve real people living real lives. Her flight was scheduled for 8:45 a.m., giving her just enough time to stop by a coffee kiosk and grab a quick breakfast sandwich. She reached her gate with about 20 minutes to spare. There, she settled into one of the airport's plastic chairs and scanned her phone for urgent emails. That was when a gate agent announced, "Pre-boarding will begin shortly," prompting Kiana to switch into standby mode, ready to stand in line when they called first class, but not eager to make a scene about her priority status. It was then that she noticed a flight attendant passing by her airline badge identified her as Alicia Martin. Alicia gave a benign smile to a nearby traveler, then glanced at Kiana with a fleeting expression that Kiana could only describe as coolly suspicious. For a second, she thought she might be over-analyzing. People give odd looks in airports all the time. Maybe Alicia was just having an off morning. Kiana politely dipped her head in acknowledgement and returned her attention to her phone. She had no idea that over the next couple of hours, Alicia Martin would orchestrate an event that would not only disrupt the flight, but also spark a firestorm on social media and in the press. When the gate agent called for first-class passengers to board, Kiana grabbed her carry-on and got in line. She never flaunted her position, nor did she hide it. But it sometimes created awkwardness. She could sense people behind her wondering if she truly belonged in the first-class line. A good number of them recognized her, though, offering nods or quick waves. Others simply minded their own business, scrolling on their phones. Alicia Martin was stationed at the gate entrance, scanning boarding passes. A second attendant stood beside her, assisting with crowd flow. When it came Kiana's turn, she stepped forward, wearing a composed but friendly expression. "Good morning," Kiana said, offering her boarding pass. Alicia glanced at the pass, then up at Kiana's face. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable curiosity, perhaps disbelief. "Monsieur A.M.," she said, voice tight. "We're boarding first class right now." "Yes, I'm aware," Kiana replied politely. "Here you go." She offered the pass again. With a slight crease in her brow, Alicia scanned it. After the machine beeped and displayed the correct seat assignment, Alicia handed the pass back without a word. She offered none of the usual courtesy, just a clipped "enjoy your flight." Kiana nodded, attributing Alicia's demeanor to possible fatigue or stress. "Airport staff have it rough sometimes," she reminded herself. "I don't want to assume anything." As she walked down the jet bridge, she let out a low exhale, shaking off the minor tension. She decided it was just a fleeting moment, hardly worth stewing over. The cabin doors of the aircraft beckoned. Kiana stepped aboard, greeted by the warm smile of an older flight attendant wearing a name tag, Harold. He welcomed her, checked her boarding pass again, and guided her to her seat, 2A. She found a spot in the overhead bin for her carry-on, carefully stowed her satchel next to it, and slid into her seat. A wide window revealed the dawn sky just beyond the airport's tarmac. She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, her mind drifting between the policy proposals in her bag and the upcoming event in Chicago. 5 minutes later, she sensed someone approaching. Peering over her shoulder, she saw Alicia stepping down the aisle, scrutinizing seat numbers. When Alicia reached Kiana, she paused. "Are you all settled in?" Alicia asked, her voice polite but lacking warmth. Kiana offered a quick smile. "Yes, thank you." Alicia nodded curtly and moved on. Kiana felt, rather than saw, Alicia's lingering glance, like the flight attendant, still questioned whether Kiana truly belonged in that seat. But she reminded herself not to dwell. She had bigger things on her plate. The rest of the first-class cabin quickly filled with business travelers and 1 or 2 families with small children. A hush of routine cabin announcements followed, instructing everyone to place electronics in airplane mode and fasten seatbelts. Through all of it, Kiana kept a calm, professional posture, setting her phone on silent and slipping a small notebook onto her tray table in case an idea for the outreach event popped into her head. The plane taxied onto the runway, then soared into the air. A comforting rumble accompanied the ascent. Kiana watched the city shrink beneath her, feeling that familiar mix of relief and anticipation. She was leaving one set of responsibilities for another, but the short flight would give her a needed breather, or so she hoped. About 20 minutes after takeoff, once they reached cruising altitude, the flight attendants began their initial service. Alicia and Harold worked in tandem, offering drinks and small snacks to first-class passengers. Harold approached Kiana, greeting her with a friendly grin. "Anything to drink, ma'am?" "A little water, please," Kiana replied. "And maybe coffee, if it's not too much trouble." "Certainly," Harold said. "Cream or sugar? Just cream, thanks." While Harold went to prepare the coffee, Alicia passed by, collecting trash from another passenger. She paused at Kiana's row, scanning the seat pocket in front of her. "Need anything?" Alicia asked, eyes not quite meeting Kiana's. "I'm all set," Kiana said, trying to sound upbeat. Alicia resumed her route but let out a small sniff, as though unconvinced. Kiana frowned slightly. Why does she seem suspicious of me? She brushed it off again, determined to keep the flight drama free. Moments later, Harold returned with coffee. He placed the paper cup on Kiana's tray table. "Enjoy, Miss Roberts," he said kindly, addressing her by name as indicated on his passenger list. "I'll be right back with some cream." Kiana thanked him. She was about to lift the cup to test the temperature when Alicia swooped in. "Let me handle that," Alicia said curtly, seemingly out of nowhere. She reached over Kiana's tray table to adjust the coffee, but her abrupt movement caused the liquid to slosh. A small splash leapt over the cup's rim, landing on Kiana's hand. "Ah," Kiana gasped, jerking her hand back. It wasn't a severe burn, but it was hot enough to sting. Alicia barely glanced at her. "Watch it," she muttered. "You almost spilled it on yourself." Kiana sucked in her breath, swallowing her retort. She dabbled her hand with the edge of her napkin. "I think you might have reached over a bit too quickly," she managed, trying to remain cordial. "I'm okay, though," Alicia bristled. "I'm just trying to help. Maybe you should be more careful." An uneasy quiet settled over the seat. Kiana felt her pulse quicken, but she fought to maintain decorum. Politicians learn early on to pick their battles. She wasn't about to turn a minor coffee spill into a confrontation, particularly not in the cramped environment of an airplane, and especially given that she needed to remain composed if this turned into a bigger issue. Perhaps Alicia was having a genuinely rough day. Maybe she was dealing with personal problems. No need to escalate, Kiana thought. As Alicia moved away, Harold returned with cream in a small plastic cup. He immediately noticed the droplets of coffee on the tray. "Oh dear, let me grab you some fresh napkins," he offered, a mild worry creasing his forehead. "Everything all right?" Kiana forced a tight smile. "It's fine, thanks. Just a little spill." Harold rushed to get napkins, apologizing on Alicia's behalf without directly blaming her. Kiana appreciated his concern. At least someone on the crew was mindful of passenger comfort. She tried to put the strange tension behind her, but a prickle of anxiety lingered, leaving her unsettled. She decided to quietly observe Alicia's behavior for the rest of the flight, just in case. Kiana had been in the Senate for nearly 3 years, but she'd spent her entire adult life advocating for policy changes that could uplift marginalized communities. Growing up in Chicago's South Side, she had experienced firsthand the systemic disadvantages that shaped her neighborhood: failing schools, limited access to healthcare, and the constant specter of violence. Her mother had worked 2 jobs as a caregiver and housekeeping staff, instilling in Kiana the values of perseverance and empathy. Her father had passed away when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. Those early experiences lit a fire in Kiana's heart, driving her to excel academically. She earned scholarships, fought her way into law school, then clerked for a judge in Illinois before eventually running for local office. Her local success led to a run for a House seat, and later to the Senate seat that she now occupied. The journey had been filled with setbacks, microaggressions, and doubt, both from others and, at times, from within herself. Still, she believed in forging alliances and working with people who might never fully understand her experiences, but could at least commit to justice. She prided herself on her level-headedness, especially in confrontational moments. In her mind, that skill had become a necessity. As a black woman in politics, the slightest show of anger could be weaponized against her. She refused to give ammunition to those who wanted to undermine her progress. Yet sitting in that airplane seat, nursing the mild sting on her hand, she felt a twinge of weariness. The realization that she couldn't even board a plane peacefully without suspicion crept up on her like a bitter truth. She took a long sip of coffee, careful not to spill again, and reminded herself that the world was more than these negative interactions. She had allies, supporters, and a strong sense of purpose. One flight attendant's behavior wasn't going to shake her. Across the aisle, a business executive was busy typing on a laptop. He glanced at Kiana, offered a polite smile, then returned to his work. Kiana gave him a slight nod. She noticed that Alicia had now reached the far end of the first-class cabin, handing out blankets and pillows. A couple of times, Alicia looked in Kiana's direction, her brow furrowed. What is she thinking? Kiana wondered, not for the first time. Does she recognize me or resent me for some reason? About 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign flicked on as the captain announced a bit of turbulence. Alicia and Harold advised passengers to remain seated, collecting loose cups and trash. When Alicia reached Kiana's row, she hesitated, as though considering whether to speak. Eventually, she simply took the empty coffee cup from Kiana's tray and moved along in silence. Kiana exhaled a silent prayer that the remainder of the flight might pass without incident. Shortly after the turbulence subsided, Kiana decided to use the restroom. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, rolling her stiff shoulders. First class had a small lavatory near the front of the cabin, and she was relieved to see no line. As she stepped toward the lavatory door, Alicia appeared, blocking her path. "Monsieur A.M.," Alicia said, her voice clipped. "You need to remain in your seat until we make another announcement." Kiana frowned, casting a quick glance at the unlit seatbelt sign. "The seatbelt sign is off now. May I please use the restroom?" Alicia's lips thinned. "We haven't completed our cabin check, and it's best for you to stay seated until—" At that moment, Harold walked up, apparently overhearing the exchange. "It's okay, Alicia. The seatbelt sign is off. She can use the lav if she wants." Alicia shot Harold a look that could freeze water, but she stepped aside. "Fine," she said, "but please make it quick." Kiana pursed her lips, holding back a sharp reply. She simply nodded and entered the small space, locking the door behind her. She let out a shaky breath, feeling the tension in her body. In her reflection, she could see the frustration etched in her features. "Calm down," she told herself. "This is an inconvenience, sure, but you can't lose your temper." She splashed a bit of water on her hands to soothe the mild burn from earlier, noticing how it still tingled. Emerging from the lavatory, she found Alicia hovering near the cockpit entrance, as though standing guard. Kiana moved past her without a word. She could almost feel Alicia's gaze boring into her back, like a silent accusation that Kiana was up to no good. "Why is she treating me this way?" The question circled through Kiana's mind, intensifying the uneasy swirl in her gut. When Kiana reached her seat, she decided to do something proactive. She pulled out her phone and discreetly jotted down notes about Alicia's behavior, just in case. She had no desire to cause trouble, but she sensed that this situation might escalate, and she didn't want to be caught without a clear record of the sequence of events. Harold came by again with water. Kiana thanked him quietly, sipping as she tried to refocus on the speech for the outreach event in Chicago. She typed a few lines into her phone's notes app, referencing the new job training program's success stories. She wanted to highlight real names and real accomplishments, like a young man who'd gone from being laid off at a local factory to receiving training in its support, ultimately landing a job that paid well above minimum wage. She was halfway through editing a bullet point when a small commotion drew her attention to the front of the cabin. Alicia was speaking into an intercom phone, her tone hushed but urgent. Kiana couldn't catch every word, but phrases like need to ensure passenger compliance and possible threat drifted across the rows. Alarm bells went off in Kiana's mind. Is she talking about me? The idea seemed surreal. She hadn't done anything remotely threatening. Before Kiana could process the situation, the overhead speaker crackled, and a smooth male voice, likely the captain, came on. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as our crew completes an additional safety check. We appreciate your cooperation. The seatbelt sign flashed on again, even though the flight was still in generally smooth conditions. Kiana felt her pulse climb. She saw Alicia hang up the intercom phone, then march briskly toward the curtained area at the front of the cabin. The tension grew thicker. One of the other first-class passengers, an older woman with silver hair, leaned across the aisle and whispered to Kiana, "Do you know what's going on?" "I'm not sure," Kiana replied quietly, forcing a reassuring smile. She could sense the woman's anxiety. We might be in for some sort of security runaround, Kiana thought. But why? Moments later, 2 uniformed airline security officers stepped into first class from the cockpit area. Kiana's heart lurched. She hadn't realized there were in-flight security personnel aboard. Sometimes they fly incognito. Alicia met them near the front row and started talking in hushed but emphatic tones, gesturing discreetly toward Kiana's seat. Kiana's chest tightened, and her immediate reaction was, "No, this can't be happening." She glanced around for Harold, but he was nowhere in sight. The older woman across the aisle, now also alarmed, murmured, "This is strange. They're looking at you." Sure enough, the uniformed officers began making their way toward Kiana. She stayed seated, hands resting calmly on her lap. "Remember your composure," she mentally reminded herself. These moments matter. When the 2 officers reached her row, one leaned down and spoke in a low voice. "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions," he said, glancing at a small notepad in his hand. "Could you please identify yourself?" Kiana's adrenaline spiked. She pulled out her driver's license from her wallet and offered it. Her official Senate ID was also in her wallet, but she didn't want to start with that unless necessary. "I'm Kiana Roberts," she said evenly. "I'm a United States Senator from Illinois." One officer's eyes briefly widened. He compared the name on the license to something on his notepad. "We received a report that you have been repeatedly refusing crew instructions, acting suspiciously near the cockpit, and exhibiting threatening behavior." He paused, as though it sounded ridiculous even to him. Kiana inhaled sharply, fighting to keep her voice steady. "That's completely false. I've followed every instruction. I used the restroom once when the seatbelt sign was off, and that's all. I have no idea why the flight attendant is accusing me of these things." The second officer cleared his throat. "We have to take any report from the crew seriously, ma'am. Please remain in your seat. When we land, you may be asked to deplane for further questioning by airport security." Kiana's heart sank. They might delay me from my event, all because of Alicia's baseless accusations. The urge to protest flared, but she kept herself in check. "I understand your position," she said firmly, "but I would like to call on other witnesses. The attendant, Harold, can confirm I haven't done anything threatening." One officer nodded, still looking uncomfortable. "We'll speak to the rest of the crew. In the meantime, please do not leave your seat or move about the cabin unless necessary." Kiana nodded. She sensed that raising her voice or becoming defensive could backfire. The officers retreated, heading toward the galley. She slumped back in her seat, her mind racing. "This is absurd. They're threatening to have me detained over nothing." The older woman across the aisle reached over, gently patting Kiana's arm. "I saw you the whole time," the woman said softly. "You did nothing wrong. If they ask me, I'll vouch for you." Kiana smiled gratefully. "Thank you, that means a lot." She was relieved to see that not everyone in first class was oblivious or siding with Alicia. Some had apparently noticed the unfairness of the situation. About 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Kiana remained in her seat, fists clenched around the strap of her satchel. She kept replaying Alicia's every word, every glare, trying to figure out the impetus for such hostility. Could it be a case of racial bias? The possibility rattled her, though it wasn't exactly new territory in her life. She had faced bigoted or biased encounters before, but rarely in such a blatant and potentially dangerous context. Eventually, Harold emerged from behind the curtain, accompanied by the 2 security officers. Kiana couldn't quite hear what they were saying, but Harold's agitated gestures indicated he was defending her. The group looked over in Kiana's direction multiple times, then conferred again with Alicia. She stood with stiff posture, arms folded. The entire cabin felt suspended in dread, as though at any moment a real confrontation would erupt. Finally, Harold separated from them and hurried down the aisle to Kiana. He knelt by her seat, lowering his voice. "I told them you were following all our instructions," he whispered. "I don't know why Alicia is singling you out, but the captain wants to talk with you himself once we land. Until then, they've asked that you stay put." Kiana nodded, forcing calm into her voice. "I appreciate you speaking up for me, Harold. I'm sorry this is happening." He shook his head sadly. "I'm sorry too. I've worked for this airline for almost 30 years. I've never seen a situation escalated like this without real cause." His words provided a small measure of comfort. At least it wasn't just Kiana's imagination that things had spiraled out of control. Harold patted her hand gently, then stood to resume his duties, leaving Kiana with the dreadful knowledge that she'd have to endure the rest of the flight under suspicion. Across the aisle, that same older woman, who introduced herself as Miss S. Gaines, offered a reassuring nod. "We'll stand behind you," she said. "At least 4 of us in this cabin have seen how respectful you've been." A wave of relief coursed through Kiana. In a moment of vulnerability, the compassion of strangers meant everything. As the flight droned on, Kiana found her thoughts drifting to past hardships. It was always surprising how quickly her mind latched onto old experiences whenever she faced new adversity. She remembered being 14, walking into a library in a predominantly white suburb with a friend. The librarian had followed them through every aisle, questioning whether they intended to purchase library merchandise or cause trouble. The memory of that embarrassment still made her cringe. Then there was her first internship at a prestigious law firm, where her supervisor consistently gave her menial tasks far below her skill level. She later discovered he believed she'd only gotten the internship because of a diversity quota. Over time, she'd proven her worth by outperforming many colleagues, but the hurt still lingered. In her earliest campaign days, she'd encountered blatant doubts, some from within her own party. Pundits would say, "Isn't she too young for such a role?" Or "She lacks the gravitas of more seasoned politicians." In reality, they questioned whether a black woman from Chicago's underprivileged neighborhoods could handle high-level political negotiations. Well, she had proven them wrong, winning local office and eventually a Senate seat. Now, on this flight, she felt those old scars tingling. The suspicion in Alicia's eyes, the readiness to believe she might be a threat, seemed to echo the systemic biases Kiana knew all too well. She breathed carefully, centering her focus. "I've worked too hard to be unraveled by one person's prejudice," she told herself. When the captain's voice finally announced, "We'll be descending into Chicago O'Hare shortly," Kiana tensed. This was the moment of truth. If Alicia insisted on pressing her accusations, Kiana could be met at the gate by law enforcement, or worse, forcibly removed. She needed to be in Bronzeville by late afternoon for that major community event. The thought of being detained over something so baseless filled her with dread. The plane touched down with a gentle bounce, and Kiana's heart hammered in her chest. She glanced at her phone. 1:05 p.m. She still had ample time to make the event if things didn't get too complicated. A sense of stubborn resolve took hold. I will not let prejudice stop me from doing my job today. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Alicia stood near the front, conversing in hushed tones with the flight security officers. Harold hovered close by, arms folded protectively. Nearby passengers craned their necks, clearly aware that something unusual was unfolding. The seatbelt sign switched off. Ordinarily, this was the cue for everyone to retrieve their overhead luggage and form a line in the aisle. But no one stood in Kiana's row. In fact, people seemed hesitant to move. They're waiting to see what happens, Kiana realized. A moment later, one of the uniformed officers stepped forward, speaking over the cabin's mild chatter. Passengers, please remain seated for a moment while we address a situation with one of the travelers. We appreciate your patience. A visible ripple of curiosity and concern swept through the aisle. Mrs. Gaines caught Kiana's eye, her expression brimming with empathy. Kiana forced a tight smile. Then the officer motioned for Kiana to step into the aisle. Miss Roberts, we need you to gather your things. Kiana stood, lifting her carry-on from the overhead bin. She braced herself for an embarrassing public confrontation. Is there a problem? She asked, her voice audible enough for the nearby passengers to hear. Alicia stepped in, her posture rigid. We believe you've been uncooperative and potentially threatening during the flight, she said, addressing not just Kiana but the entire cabin. You'll have to speak to airport security. A few passengers gasped. One man exclaimed, "That's ridiculous. She did nothing." Another murmured, "I watched the whole flight. This is insane." Kiana's heart soared momentarily at the show of solidarity, but she forced herself to remain calm. She turned to face Alicia. I have been cooperative the entire time. I would like to provide my statement to the airline manager and airport officials immediately. She paused, deciding to reveal her status plainly. I'm also a United States Senator, and I expect due process. Alicia stiffened, as if hearing Kiana's senatorial status for the first time. Her eyes flickered with something close to panic, but she pressed on. Anyone can claim they're a senator, she snapped. We'll see what the authorities say. Kiana bit back a surge of anger, but she did hold up her official Senate ID, carefully flipping open the protective sleeve so that the seal was visible. That caused a ripple of whispers throughout the cabin. The security officers shared a glance. One asked quietly, "Can I see that ID, ma'am?" Kiana handed it over. She watched his face register clear surprise. He blinked, reading her name and credentials, then quietly passed it to his colleague. Alicia made a derisive sound in her throat, but said nothing. All right, said the first officer, returning the ID. We'll escort you to speak with local law enforcement and the airline manager. Once your identity is verified and statements are taken, you'll be free to go, assuming everything checks out. It will check out, Kiana said, injecting firmness into her tone. Some passengers began filming on their phones. The embarrassment factor loomed large, but Kiana refused to cower. She gathered her satchel, gave Miss S. Gaines a nod of gratitude, and followed the officers down the aisle. As she passed, a few passengers clapped or muttered encouragement, like, "We believe you," or "This is so wrong." It buoyed her spirit, even as her nerves churned. The jet bridge was cold and fluorescent, an abrupt change from the airplane's climate-controlled interior. 2 local airport security officers awaited them, along with a man in a suit who introduced himself as Randall Green, the airline's Chicago-based manager. He looked tense, a sheen of sweat on his brow, though it was hardly warm. The in-flight officers briefed Randall, describing Alicia's accusations. Alicia stood at a slight distance, arms crossed, exuding defiance. Harold hung back as well, looking uneasy, while Kiana tried to maintain a stoic posture. Once Randall heard the gist, he turned to Kiana, bowing his head respectfully. "Monsieur A.M., I'm sorry you've been inconvenienced. We need to gather statements. Could you please confirm your identity?" Kiana offered her Senate ID again, as well as her driver's license. Randall inspected both. His eyes widened, and he let out a slow breath. "Senator Roberts, I had no idea you were on this flight. I deeply apologize for the confusion." He glanced at Alicia, who averted her gaze. Kiana folded her arms. "Mr. Green, I want to resolve this quickly. I have to attend an important event. I'm happy to cooperate, but I need to make it clear that the flight attendant's accusations are entirely unfounded." Alicia bristled. "I know what I saw," she insisted. "She was wandering near the cockpit and ignoring my orders. I have a duty to protect the flight." Kiana could barely contain her frustration. "I did use the restroom once, with permission from Harold, and the seatbelt sign was off at the time. Beyond that, I remained seated." Harold stepped forward, looking at Randall. "I was with Miss Roberts the entire time in first class. She wasn't disruptive. If anything, she endured hostility from Alicia." Harold hesitated, then added carefully, "It seems like Alicia may have misinterpreted certain actions." Alicia let out a derisive snort. "So you're taking her side?" "I'm taking the side of truth," Harold said quietly. Randall studied Alicia's face, then turned to the local security officers. "I believe we have sufficient statements. If the senator hasn't engaged in any wrongdoing, she's free to go." One of the airport's security officers turned to Alicia. "Did you witness any explicit threat from the senator, or was it just an assumption based on her movements?" Alicia fumbled for words, her composure slipping. "She was walking around," she said, "and she kept messing with overhead bins." "That's a lie," Kiana interjected, raising her voice for the first time. "I never touched any overhead bin except for my own carry-on." Harold nodded in agreement. "That's correct. She only retrieved her items when it was allowed." Alicia's face reddened. She seemed to realize she was cornered. "Fine," she snapped, "but I have a right to feel safe on my own flight." Randall exhaled, turning to the security officers. "Based on the contradictory nature of Alicia's statements and the corroboration from Mr. Harold and, presumably, other passengers, I see no reason to detain Senator Roberts." The older of the two local security officers nodded. "MAAM, you're free to go. We apologize for the inconvenience." Relief and anger warred within Kiana. She looked at Randall. "I need to ensure this incident is recorded. I don't want to simply walk away and pretend it never happened." Randall's posture stiffened. "We will file a formal report, Senator. I encourage you to contact our customer relations department if you want to pursue any additional action. Please accept my personal apology and that of the airline." Kiana nodded slowly, though the apology felt insufficient given the humiliation she'd just endured. She glanced at Alicia, whose face remained stony. Kiana wasn't sure whether the woman felt remorseful or simply resented being called out. Either way, the damage was done. "Then I'll be on my way," Kiana said coolly. "I have an event to attend." Harold touched her shoulder gently before she left. "I'm so sorry, Senator," he whispered. "I'll back you up if you choose to lodge a complaint." She squeezed his hand in thanks, then turned and strode up the jet bridge, refusing to glance back at Alicia. "I'm not letting her see any more of my pain," Kiana vowed. The local security officers parted to let her pass, one offering a subdued nod. Randall tried to apologize once more, but Kiana pressed on, forging ahead into the terminal. She still had a day's work in front of her and a fresh wave of indignation fueling her resolve. Adrenaline thrummed through Kiana as she navigated O'Hare's bustling corridors. She fished out her phone to check the time. 1:40 p.m. The Bronzeville event was set for 4:00 p.m., giving her just enough time to reach home, freshen up, and review her notes before heading to the community center. If traffic cooperates, she reminded herself. She noticed a couple of onlookers who seemed to recognize her. One middle-aged man gave her a sympathetic look, as though he'd witnessed the fracas near the gate. Kiana mustered a polite smile before quickening her pace toward baggage claim. Her mind churned with conflicting emotions: relief that she wasn't detained, anger that she had to defend herself against false accusations, and a broader sadness that such profiling was still so prevalent even for someone with her high-profile status. By the time she collected her checked bag, her phone buzzed with messages. Her chief of staff, Tasha, had sent a flurry of texts. "Just heard something went down on your flight. Are you okay?" Followed by media inquiries are coming in. "Call me ASAP." Kiana's stomach tightened at the mention of media inquiries. Did someone from the flight tweet about the incident? Was there a viral video already? The modern news cycle moved with ruthless speed. She typed a quick reply, "I'm fine," heading to the car. "We'll call in 10. She walked briskly to the arrival's pickup area, where a staffer waited with a sign that read Sen Roberts. The staffer, a young volunteer named Zoe, looked anxious. "Senator, oh my goodness, are you all right?" Zoe asked. "I'm okay," Kiana said, forcing a smile. "Just a ridiculous fiasco on the plane. Let's get going. We don't have much time." They piled into a black sedan. Kiana sat in the back, dialing Tasha's number. As the car pulled away, she explained the entire ordeal in a calm, factual tone, occasionally letting her frustration seep through. Tasha gasped more than once, especially upon hearing that Kiana's identity as a senator had been questioned. "This is unacceptable," Tasha said firmly. "We should draft a statement. The press is going to want details." Kiana mulled it over. Part of her wanted to handle this privately, lodging a complaint through official channels without public drama. But another part recognized the importance of shining a light on the discrimination she'd faced. "Let's prepare a measured statement," Kiana said finally. "Emphasize that this is part of a broader issue. We can't stay silent." Tasha agreed, promising to have a draft ready by the time Kiana arrived at her home. Kiana ended the call, leaning back against the seat, massaging her temples. She thought of all the nameless people who faced worse incidents in air travel with no platform to fight back. That knowledge steeled her resolve. She wasn't just doing this for herself, she was doing it for everyone who'd been profiled and marginalized. After a quick stop at her home to shower and change into a fresh suit, Kiana arrived at the Bronzeville Community Center at exactly 3:50 p.m. The building bustled with excitement. Local youth, non-profit leaders, and neighborhood residents had gathered to hear about new job training programs. Kiana breathed in the lively energy, letting it dispel some of the tension still clinging to her from the flight incident. In the corridor, Tasha stood by a folding table lined with pamphlets, giving last minute instructions to a group of volunteers. She hurried over to Kiana. "The press is here," Tasha said. "They're setting up in the back row. I can stall them until after your speech, but they'll definitely want comments about the flight." Kiana closed her eyes briefly, summoning her inner reserves. "All right, let's do the speech, then I'll address the press. But I don't want to overshadow the reason we're here. This event is about these young people and their opportunities." Tasha nodded, giving her a supportive pat on the arm. "Understood." With that, Kiana stepped into the main auditorium. The crowd erupted in applause, camera flashes popping. An organizer introduced her with a glowing speech, citing her work on federal grants and praising her for never forgetting her community roots. Kiana felt a wave of gratitude, remembering the many times she stood in rooms like this as an undergrad hungry for hope. Taking the podium, Kiana gazed over the crowd, spotting parents with kids in tow. Seniors who'd lived in Bronzeville their entire lives, and fresh-faced teens eagerly waiting for anything that resembled a brighter future. She began by thanking the organizers and highlighting success stories from the job training programs. She described how these programs provided pathways into technology, healthcare, and the trades. She told the story of one participant who had gone from unemployment to earning an associate's degree in cybersecurity, all through the scholarships made possible by federal grants. Toward the end of her speech, she took a breath. The incident on the plane weighed on her mind, and she felt compelled to connect it to the broader struggle for equity. "I want to share a personal note from today," she said, her voice resonating through the room's PAR system. "On my flight here, I experienced a confrontation that, in my view, stemmed from bias, a misunderstanding that escalated because someone looked at me and assumed I didn't belong or that I posed a threat." She saw heads nodding in the audience. People whispered to one another, aware of how common such profiling was. "Even as a U.S. Senator," she continued, "I found myself defending my right to simply sit, to breathe, to exist in a space where someone thought I shouldn't be. This wasn't my first experience with bias, and I'm sure it won't be my last. But let it serve as a reminder. If I, with all my resources and visibility, can be treated this way, imagine how often it happens to those with fewer protections." The auditorium fell silent, the weight of her words settling in. We must use these experiences, whether they happen in an airplane cabin, a grocery store, or a classroom, to fuel our determination for justice, she said. When we invest in programs like the ones here in Bronzeville, we're not just creating jobs, we're building a community that sees each individual's value and refuses to let bias dictate anyone's future. Applause surged, some people rising to their feet. Kiana's eyes stung with emotion. She stepped away from the microphone as the organizers came forward to present plaques to distinguished participants of the job training program. The moment felt triumphant, overshadowing the earlier humiliations. "This is why I do what I do," she reminded herself. When the applause died down, Kiana moved to a smaller room where reporters had gathered. Tasha stood by, ready to moderate. As expected, the first questions were about the new training grants and the local job opportunities. But soon, a local news anchor turned the conversation toward the flight incident. "Senator Roberts, can you confirm the reports that you were detained or nearly detained by airline security today?" the anchor asked, microphone extended. Kiana held her composure. "I wasn't formally detained, but I was briefly questioned because of an unfounded accusation made by a flight attendant," she said evenly. "The accusation was that I refused instructions and posed a threat, which was completely false. Fortunately, witnesses, including another crew member, confirmed that I did nothing wrong." Another reporter jumped in. "Is it true that once you showed your Senate ID, the confrontation de-escalated?" Kiana inclined her head. "That certainly helped clarify my identity. But I want to emphasize that if I hadn't had that ID, if I were just an average passenger, who knows how long I might have been held or how far the situation could have escalated. This isn't just about me. It's about systemic bias that leads to undue suspicion of black travelers, and for that matter, many others who are unfairly profiled." The cameras flashed. Journalists typed furiously. Kiana sensed this would be a national story by tomorrow. Part of her worried about the personal toll, but she also recognized the significance. This might lead to a larger conversation on discrimination in the airline industry. Before leaving, she expressed gratitude to the airline manager, Randall Green, for acting swiftly once the plane landed. "I do appreciate that the local manager and others took my statement seriously, but we can't just fix incidents after they happen. We need policies and training in place to prevent them." With that, the press conference ended, Kiana left the building, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She could already imagine social media exploding with hashtags referencing her ordeal. Tasha patted her on the back. "You handled that gracefully," she said. "Thanks," Kiana murmured, exhaustion creeping in. But the day's not over yet. The very next morning, Tasha's phone call woke Kiana at dawn. "Senator," Tasha said, voice urgent, "I just heard from an airline executive. They're scrambling to contain the PR fallout from yesterday. They want to talk to you, offer apologies, maybe meet with you." Kiana rubbed her eyes, both hopeful and wary. "Let's set up a meeting," she said. "I want them to understand. This wasn't just about me being inconvenienced. There's a systemic issue at play." Later that day, a Zoom call was arranged with a top-level airline executive named Megan Porter and Randall Green. Porter expressed deep regret over the incident, assuring Kiana that the airline was launching an internal investigation into Alicia's actions. She hinted that Alicia might face disciplinary measures. Kiana responded firmly but politely, emphasizing the need for improved training on implicit bias. She recounted how humiliating and stressful it was to be singled out, especially given her position and time-sensitive commitments. Megan Porter nodded vigorously. "Senator, we're so sorry this happened. We've had prior complaints of a similar nature, and this incident highlights the urgency for enhanced protocols." Kiana appreciated the candor. "I don't want to see any flight attendant lose their job needlessly," she clarified. "But accountability is crucial, and we can't just treat this like a one-off event. Airline policies must ensure that staff aren't weaponizing security protocols based on personal biases." Randall Green looked remorseful, recalling how alarmed he'd been in the jet bridge. "We're prepared to announce a revised training program within the next few weeks. We'd also like to publish a statement acknowledging the incident and how we plan to prevent future occurrences." "I'll hold you to that," Kiana said, her voice steady. "You can't imagine how many stories like mine go unheard." After the call ended, Tasha gave Kiana a thumbs up. "We'll see if they follow through, but at least it's a start," she remarked. Over the next few days, Kiana's story gained traction in national media. Some outlets painted Alicia as a rogue flight attendant, while others zeroed in on the airline's broader reputation. Civil rights organizations voiced support for Kiana, using her experience to highlight patterns of discrimination in the travel industry. Soon, other travelers shared similar accounts on social media, creating a wave of personal testimonies that the airline could no longer ignore. As public scrutiny intensified, Kiana found herself juggling the demands of her legislative role with the onslaught of interviews and panel invitations. Every news outlet wanted to speak with her. Morning shows, political roundtables, podcasts focusing on systemic racism. The story became a flashpoint for discussing racial profiling in American travel. Kiana tried to balance the personal angle, how humiliating and stressful it was for her that day, with a broader call to action. Meanwhile, Alicia Martin's fate became a topic of speculation. Rumors swirled that the airline suspended her pending investigation. Some tabloids reported she was threatening to sue for wrongful termination if the airline fired her. Kiana, for her part, didn't relish the idea of anyone losing their livelihood. Yet she also believed consequences must follow such blatant abuse of authority. If she faces termination, that's on her, not on me, Kiana told herself, though part of her felt a twinge of sadness that it had reached this point. One afternoon, Kiana read a heartfelt email from a single mother in Street, Louis, who'd encountered a similar situation with a flight crew. The mother wrote, "I never had the courage to speak up. I thought no one would believe me. Seeing your story out there gives me hope." That message reaffirmed Kiana's decision to be open. Despite the personal toll exhaustion, vulnerability, she recognized this, was bigger than her comfort. Within weeks, the buzz around Kiana's experience led to a closed-door meeting on Capitol Hill. Leaders from multiple airlines, including Kiana's, met with a group of senators and representatives concerned about discrimination in travel. Kiana attended, determined to hold the industry accountable. She prepared a short presentation detailing the data on bias-related complaints, gleaned from public records and first-hand testimonies. During the meeting, she spoke passionately about the humiliating ordeal of being flagged for suspicious behavior without any factual basis. She argued that systemic changes, including robust training, clear complaint channels, and transparent accountability, were necessary to ensure fairness for all passengers. Some airline executives balked at the idea of mandated regulations, preferring voluntary guidelines. Kiana stood firm, listing numerous instances where voluntary measures had failed to deter discriminatory practices. Traveling by plane shouldn't be an act of courage, she insisted. It's a public service. Everyone, regardless of background, should be treated with basic dignity. By the time the meeting ended, a preliminary consensus emerged. The airlines would collaborate with civil rights experts to develop mandatory training. They also agreed to more rigorous oversight of flight attendants' use of security protocols. Kiana took it as a step forward, small but meaningful. While the airline's official investigation progressed, Kiana learned that Alicia Martin had indeed been suspended. Part of her felt relief, accountability was in motion. But she also remembered the severe expression on Alicia's face and wondered if there was more behind Alicia's hostility than just prejudice. Perhaps personal stresses or past traumas had fueled her paranoia. Of course, that didn't excuse what happened. Then, one afternoon, a surprising letter arrived at Kiana's office from Alicia herself. The envelope bore no return address. Inside, the single-page letter read, "Senator Roberts, I'm writing because I realize my actions have caused you distress. I wish things had gone differently. I felt uneasy that day, and something about you set off my alarms. I can't say I have a good explanation for it, but I acknowledge that I overreacted. I see now how my assumptions and the power I held over passenger safety protocols created this mess. You might not believe me, but this incident has made me rethink a lot. Sincerely, Alicia Martin." The letter wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, an admission that Alicia recognized she'd erred. Kiana read it twice, looking for sincerity between the lines. Maybe it was genuine, maybe it was a last-ditch attempt to avoid legal repercussions. Either way, it offered a small glimpse of regret. Kiana decided not to reply directly. She had no desire to rekindle that tension. Let the airline's process unfold, she told herself. Ultimately, the airline concluded its investigation, issuing a statement that Alicia's behavior was in direct contradiction to company policies regarding passenger treatment and anti-discrimination guidelines. She was let go. Kiana learned of Alicia's termination through the press. Despite her relief that the airline took the matter seriously, she felt a pang of empathy at the idea of anyone losing their job. Yet accountability demanded consequences. In the months that followed, Kiana channeled the energy from that flight experience into more robust advocacy. She co-sponsored legislation aimed at addressing racial bias in aviation, requiring all airlines to submit annual reports on security calls made against passengers. The bill also proposed a passenger bill of rights that included clearer protocols for lodging complaints and receiving timely investigations. During a Senate hearing, Kiana delivered an impassioned speech recounting her ordeal. She read excerpts from dozens of letters she'd received, stories of families who'd been asked to exit planes for reasons that turned out to be misunderstandings, people forced to endure humiliating searches, and travelers who felt powerless in the face of flight crew biases. Many watchers said it was one of her finest moments, bridging personal experience with legislative action. Meanwhile, the airline publicly vowed to revamp its training process, working with civil rights organizations to design modules tackling unconscious bias. They invited Kiana to help review the training curriculum. She agreed under the condition that it be transparent, thorough, and regularly updated. The national conversation sparked by her flight incident slowly began shifting public expectations. More travelers started speaking up, sharing stories on social media. Some flight attendants and airline employees also voiced support for reforms, acknowledging that their training in conflict resolution and bias recognition had been minimal at best. For Kiana, it felt like a partial victory. True, these changes wouldn't end discrimination overnight, but they represented a meaningful step toward accountability. Little by little, she told herself, we can change the culture. Despite the intense wave of publicity, eventually the media cycle moved on to other stories. Kiana found a semblance of normalcy in her routine meetings, hearings, community events, legislative battles on everything from healthcare to infrastructure, yet she remained vigilant. Whenever she traveled by plane, she felt a twinge of anxiety, scanning the faces of flight attendants to see if any recognized her or harbored residual resentment. Over time, she encountered more supportive than hostile responses. A couple of flight attendants even discreetly thanked her for pushing for better training, saying they, too, had witnessed unfair treatment of passengers in the past. One day, traveling for a town hall in another state, Kiana boarded a flight and was greeted by a young black flight attendant who practically beamed. "Senator Roberts, I just want to say thank you," she whispered after the plane had leveled off. "Because of what happened to you, our airline made real changes to how we handle passenger complaints and security calls. We got new training sessions that helped me and my colleagues recognize biases we might not have been aware of. It's making a difference." Kiana felt tears prick her eyes. She lightly squeezed the attendant's hand. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "Maybe some good has come out of that humiliating experience after all," she thought. "If it saves even one person from going through the same thing." About a year after the fateful flight, Kiana found herself driving through Bronzeville, the same neighborhood where she'd made that speech shortly after her ordeal. She was on her way to visit a new tech center that had opened, funded by the grant she'd helped secure. The streets were bustling with fresh energy cafes, with vibrant murals, new job postings advertised in windows, a sense of optimism in the air. She parked in front of the modern building, noting the bright sign that read Bronzeville Tech and Training Center. Inside, she was greeted by a young staffer who recognized her immediately. "Welcome, Senator Roberts." The staffer beamed. "We're so excited to show you around." As Kiana walked the halls, meeting students learning coding, digital design, and its support, her heart brimmed with pride. This was the tangible impact of her work opportunities, sprouting where there had previously been closed doors. She remembered how close she'd come to missing the event that launched this center's funding campaign, all because a flight attendant deemed her suspicious. The memory still stung, but it also fueled her hope that the world could change if people insisted on it. She glanced at her watch, almost time for the next appointment, but she took a moment in the lobby to reflect, seeing her own reflection in the center's glass doors. She was reminded of her mother's repeated mantra, "Never let them tell you where you don't belong." If there was one takeaway from the entire fiasco, it was that she had belonged in that first-class seat, she had belonged at that community event, and she belonged in the Senate, fighting for the underrepresented. "And so I will keep fighting," she told herself, "for as long as it takes, until no one is forced to prove their worth just to exist in peace." She stepped back outside into the Chicago sun, a grateful smile on her face. The future still held countless battles, but if her story could shift even a piece of the system toward fairness, then every bit of turmoil she'd endured had been worth it. This is the story of how a simple flight became an unforgettable turning point in Senator Kiana Roberts' fight for justice, how a routine journey morphed into a painful encounter with prejudice, only to ignite conversations and push for systemic reforms in the airline industry. From the humiliating moment when security was called to remove her, to the dramatic reveal of her official Senate ID, to the powerful public outcry that followed every step, underscored the gravity of bias and the resilience required to stand against it. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of the importance of holding institutions accountable, of showing empathy, and of never underestimating the power of one voice, then please like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive, fueling the belief that by spotlighting injustice, we pave the way for meaningful change. Together, let's strive for a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.